Hello.
Our story begins inside of Master Yaddle's chambers. She awoke from a meditation, feeling a deep and thrilling presence in the Force. Something had changed, like the bursting of a light from a star. It was so surreal. She could feel the tingling across her hands, and she looked around the room. This wasn't something nearby, rather distant, across time and space, where something remarkable had certainly happened. She got off the ground and peered out of her window, seeing the setting sun. Perhaps one of her peers were inside the council chamber, and they had felt it. She slung her robe over her tunic and sauntered out into the temple halls. As she walked through the towering corridors, she noted not a single reaction from anybody else within the temple. Perhaps she had picked up on something no one else had. She was confused. Surely they had felt the remarkable sensation from the Force too. Yaddle stepped to the elevator that led to the council chambers and waited inside, until it climbed to the top of the Jedi structure. When she entered, she slowly walked into the circular room itself. As the doors before her opened, she saw two Jedi Masters standing quietly. They were looking out the massive windows that looked across the city. They turned back, sensing their friend's arrival, and asked her if she had felt it too. Yaddle nodded her head before bowing respectfully to Masters Tin and Plo, who both reciprocated the bow. Their hands fell into their robes as they explained to the newly arriving Jedi Master that they had sensed a change within the tides of the Force. The calm current had shifted, as if a typhoon had swept the seas into chaos. What they experienced at this moment wasn't quite chaotic, but it was a continuation of the ripples they felt. Yaddle found it important to ask some questions as she made her way to her seat. Among these questions were, what could have caused this? Was the light being disrupted by the darkness? Had someone or something awoken this change in the Force? These questions were countered with many more that were shared between Saesee and Plo. The three Jedi Masters discussed these feelings until another one of their peers walked in, Dathomir, the bookkeeper for the Jedi Council. He stepped into the room with a datapad. He was recording his own thoughts on the matter, surprised to see that any of his peers were actually gathered in this room. The other counselors across the temple had decided to remain in their own chambers or visit one another, believing that no one would go to the top of the temple. Dathomir expressed to them that it had become apparent that no one else within the temple was aware of this. Whether or not the rest of the council was, remained unknown. However, he did admit comfort in knowing that they too felt what he felt. The four Jedi Masters spoke on this matter for hours, converging on different ideas and theories about what this could have been. There was one reference to this that the elder Jedi in the group were able to speak on. Yaddle and Plo were both well aware of the great hyperspace disaster of 232 BBY, in which millions of lives were upended. As per reports from Jedi Masters from across the years, the planet of Brendok, which was hit by the disaster, became what the Jedi referred to as a virgins in the Force. While neither Yaddle or Plo remembered the incident and their feelings at the moment, they did remember the countless reports that arose from the disaster. Among them were the virgins that was created on the world of Brendok, that was considered lifeless after the collision, so their fear was that another disaster had taken place. At this point, in the year 41 BBY, the galaxy was peaceful. The Republic was in a bland state of governing, and corruption was seeping deeper into its roots. Chancellor Kaj was trying her best to maintain some semblance of democracy, but it was slipping through her fingers by the day. Regardless of any of that, the Jedi had a decision to make based on what they had felt. For the time being, though, they would come up with a couple alternative paths to address this concern with. The coming morning would reveal that the four previously mentioned counselors weren't the only individuals that felt this movement. The rest of the High Council had too, but there was something quite revealing about this. No one else within the Jedi Order felt it. Counselors asked around prior to their morning session and found that no one else had felt the change. Terra Sinube would address the council once everyone was gathered within their sacred chambers. He told them all that a great change had infected the Force. Whether they came from darkness or if they came from the will of the Force was unknown. As Jedi, it was their duty to understand and learn about these occurrences, if they be natural or not. He wanted to help the others find this change within the Force, so as per Yoda's request, the Jedi would be splitting up. Master Plo Koon would travel to his homeworld of Doran to confront the Barando sages. Master Yaddle would accompany Master Windu to Dathomir, where they would encounter the Night Sisters and question if they had anything to do with this. Master Saesee Tin and Eth Koth would travel to the Virgins at Brendok to see if there were any signs of change in the system. Master Ancesis would travel to the Sanctuary Mount on Quen to speak to Sen Shao Vo. The caretaker of the outpost might know something of this incident. At the same time, himself and Jocasta Nu would take a trip to the former home world of the Jedi at Tython to tap into the Seeing Stone. If they could make contact with a potential otherworldly being, then they might find answers there. In the meantime, as the Council dispersed, Masters Yoda, Poof, and Depeshan would remain steadfast on Coruscant to see if the feelings they felt originated from this location. Master Poof would lead an investigation to the surface of the planet by using Mount Umate as his point of entry. Perhaps what they felt originated here on Coruscant, but deep below the surface. The Jedi typically, especially in this era, weren't known for anything other than being a police force for the Senate. They were loyal dogs, like Dooku had iterated many times. But this was such a high-frequency vibration to the Force that they had to act. If those around them couldn't sense it, then surely there was a reason for the Council to have been alerted by this disruption within the Force. The Jedi dispersed after covering some other details regarding current events that circulated around Coruscant. Nothing nearly as important, but details that were important for whenever they had more time to spare. Depeshan recorded everything and made sure it was prepared for when they had their next joint meeting. Each of the respective missions for the Jedi would challenge them to learn that many around the galaxy hadn't felt these changes. As Masters of the Council, they would go out into the cosmos to search more, after having conversations at each location and finding nothing. Plo Koon, for example, got no information from the Barandar sages. However, they directed him towards the Rishi Maze. Master Ancesis didn't have much luck with Vo out on Quen, but the two of them would search through documents inside the Sanctuary Mount. Vo was the caretaker of the Jedi location, so he had information that could be helpful to their cause. They just needed to find it. After using the Seeing Stone on Tython, Jocasta and Tara Sinube found nothing. They did alert the Sith there was something going on, but nothing else aside from that. The Sith didn't understand why the Jedi would activate the Seeing Stone, so they assumed that their failed ritual had done something. The ritual Sidious and Plagueis did to create Skywalker by accident wasn't the only time they tried to do something, so they, being well aware of their experiments, believed that they did a thing. What it was, they were unsure. But it led to them starting a trail to follow the Jedi to see what they were hunting. If they could perhaps beat them to whatever they were chasing, then they could make the illusion of whatever they felt seem like a fault on their own abilities. Meanwhile, on the planet of Dathomir, there was some sense of tension for the Jedi. Mace Windu and Yaddle confronted the Great Mother of the Night Sister clan, Mother Talzin. She and the Jedi hadn't ever been close, but she had always been a neutral face amongst the stars, comparable in the minds of the Jedi to that of the Barandar sages. However, she was not exactly neutral during their interaction. The Jedi firstly asked about the burst within the Force, something she nor her clan were privy to. It wasn't a big deal to either Jedi because not everything needed to be known by everyone. Mace was semi-suspicious because Talzin's power was similar in greatness to that of Yoda's, so surely she should have sensed something, which she legitimately hadn't. But there were a couple follow-up questions that changed the tone of the conversation. There were a few questions regarding the Force that the Jedi inquired about, but Talzin had no interest in sharing Night Sister magic with them, knowing that their orthodox methods will look down on their expansive worldview of the Force. Again, the Jedi weren't bothered by the tone that was given to them by Talzin. Everything changed within the dynamic once they asked her if she had ever been in contact with the Sith. It was a stupid question to Mace and Yaddle, but something changed when they asked the Great Mother that question. Her head twisted, her eyes darted to the left, and something within her tone shifted. This quickly alerted the Jedi that she was lying. The sad thing is, Talzin was an expert manipulator and liar, but the questions were so bland and boring that when the real question hit her, she was unprepared. That was truthfully how the Jedi did their work with other Force beings. They'd wear them down and then catch them on a simple lie. Nothing huge, but just enough to get them some semblance of an answer, which they didn't expect with this question. Mace nearly pulled his weapon, but in sensing Yaddle's discomfort with fighting the Night Sister clan alone, he decided against it. This news would be brought directly back to Yoda and the High Council for future deliberations. Though these two Jedi were not finished with Dathomir, because they'd move up to the nearby Horns of Dathomir, where they'd encounter an equally as seclusive Singing Mountain clan, and follow through with more questions. The clan leader knew very little of the change that the Jedi Counselors referenced, but she did inform them that darkness had arrived on Dathomir before. She reported that the Sith had interacted with Mother Talzin, While there was no hostility between the Great Mothers of either clan, the leader of the Mountain Dwellers sought to protect her own coven from the Jedi. She could sense the fear that circulated between the two of them, which didn't start with them, but was felt amongst their peers when they all assembled before going into the galaxy to search for answers. The Jedi were afraid of what they might find, and so her honesty would have Mace and Yaddle returning to Coruscant with confirmation of the Night Sisters interacting with the Sith in the last decade. As multiple members of the Council returned to the Great Temple on Coruscant, Jocasta Nu and Terra Sanube made a stop at a former temple on Olega to investigate some of their left-behind relics. They were curious to see if anything had been accessed after the Jedi abandoned it. What they found left them further disheartened in their search. The relics were left behind because the people had little value for Jedi history. Instead, walls were painted with anti-Jedi remarks, and the room where Master Torben removed himself from life was desecrated. It left both Jedi sad and without answer, so they too returned to Coruscant. When the Council gathered once again with all of their members, aside from Oba Rancisis, they were left at odds. A decision lay at their fingertips. The Night Sisters had lied to them, and the Jedi did not wish to hurt them, but perhaps there were more secrets of the Force that hadn't been shared. The Jedi and Night Sisters had an unspoken relationship, but in the current state of desperation that the Jedi were in, fear, they couldn't really abide by the rules that were never truly laid down. Grandmaster Yoda suggested that the Jedi make a show of force, and demand that Mother Talzin inform them of her connection to the Sith. The Jedi only wished to remain peaceful, but if their ancient enemy had returned, then perhaps they shouldn't be so underprepared. The big reason the Jedi were at all concerned with the Sith in this current timeline was due to their interaction with Talzin. The Night Sister Mother was one of the great powerful beings in the galaxy. If she had gifted the Sith knowledge, then they could become very dangerous. No longer was this a Sith order that the Jedi curb-stomped a millennium ago. This was an order that was hiding in the shadows, growing stronger by the day. Their desires were to be even more persistent because they had to prove themselves to their ancestors that they could destroy empires and build their own in the shambles what came before. This genuinely struck the Jedi with fear, because it meant that the Sith were ready for them, while the Jedi in the years since had become actively more complacent. Yoda requested that the Jedi send a task force of 200 knights to Dathomir, with Master Windu. They would threaten the Night Sisters and remind them who the true power was in the galaxy. At the same time, Yoda would confide in the Chancellor, and make sure she alerted the people to the persistent evil of the Sith. If the Jedi could say, cut the Sith off at their legs, then they could be stopped before ever becoming too dangerous. Many of the Jedi in the room were in disagreement with Yoda's desires here. They couldn't just openly threaten Mother Talzin. This was entirely a respect thing because both sides have been kind to each other for centuries. They never bothered one another, and that should be proof of trust. But colluding with the Sith in their effort to disrupt the balance in the galaxy was breaking their trust. Yoda believed that much to be true. As the Jedi mobilized for war, Master Rancisis and Val, out on Quen, discovered more points of interest. They learned of these bursts in the Force that had been more common in the galaxy before the discovery of hyperspace. Jedi navigators traveled to great distances across the stars to learn of these individual happenings. These records dated all the way back to nearly 23,000 years before. Quen's outpost held secrets that weren't even kept inside the Great Temple of Coruscant, and Vo found this data to be what the Jedi needed. He told Master Rancisis that perhaps a great person had been born. While the ancient Jedi never found conclusive evidence to these happenings, they did address that each burst was followed up by a great individual or a great event that would be brought forth into the galaxy. Whether it be tides of change or windows of opportunity, the ancient Jedi were unsure. They did, though, address that whatever these winds of force changed, they should act on it and search for it. Also, as a note, none of these bursts were nearly as great as what the Jedi had felt in the past week. But for the Jedi of the ancient world, it was much easier to sense small bursts, due to how simple things once were. These were Jedi who slept on stone beds and meditated in forests with plants embracing them. They were not living like kings and queens of the Republic. On Dathomir, the Jedi arrived, though they did not show up in force, as Masters Windu, Plo, and Yaddle descended to the surface. They spoke to Mother Talzin, informing her that they had come to learn of her interaction with the Sith. She could obviously sense the hostile force they brought to her home world, and she was not very pleased with it, informing the Jedi that they should leave and never return. But to these Jedi, the Sith had survived in the shadows, partially due to her, and it was time to remove them once and for all. Because Talzin showed hostility, literally by blasting green electricity at the Jedi, they responded with war. Dozens of Jedi shuttles dropped to the surface of the planet, and from them ran 200 Jedi. Windu and Plo took point as Master Yaddle returned to the bay of one of the ships, guarded by 2 temple guards, so that she could begin a great battle meditation. She wasn't known specifically for doing it, but she had learned it after instructing Opa Rancisis in his younger years. The Jedi charged in, their sabers all ignited and slashing at Night Sisters. The Dathomir witches gathered in the trees and shot arrows down at the Jedi attackers. Mace and Plo at the front of the line started a wall push. Because the witches were native to the planet, the Jedi needed an attack strategy, and so they used a Jedi testudo. A wave of defenders would defend the path for the Jedi, while in the back, more talented members would throw their weapons into the air. This would cut branches and trees down, giving the warriors at the front of the Jedi testudo the chance to kill off the fallen sisters. While Mother Talzin never expected the Jedi to make an all-out assault, she did have the Night Brothers around just in case they were needed. So while she and Old Daka began the ritual to raise the dead, the Night Brothers flanked the Jedi. Though, due to the rapid success of the beginning of their assault, the Jedi were able to counter. Sticks and stones might break their bones, but a lightsaber beats a rock. The Jedi weapons were able to quickly defend the incoming attacks made by these Dathomir monsters. The brothers were of course fearsome warriors, but they weren't so scary once their arms were removed. The Knights weren't playing cruel intentionally, but they were here to defeat the Sith, no matter the cost. The light couldn't be pushed to its breaking point again. At the front of the assault, elite Jedi warriors cut down Night Sisters as they fired away at them. Whether it be through using the Force or strength of their saber skills, they progressed through the Force without stopping. By the time the dead were raised, the Jedi were knocking on the doors of the cave. The bad thing for the Jedi was the fact that they were now surrounded on all sides. The undead horde rose up from behind them, and the still alive sisters were firing at the front of the Jedi line from inside the cave. They had by this point lost a good 30 or so members during their assault. But here is where Yaddle's battle meditation would assist the Jedi the most. She focused hard in the Force, levitating off the surface of the cabin she sat within, and connecting every single Jedi warrior on the front line. They defended their brothers and sisters. Each and every Jedi worked in tandem with one another, slicing through undead Knights' demons. The fight was one of communication, and the Knights, even over the howls of undead ghouls, communicated directions to one another. At the front of the pack, near the entrance of the cave, Mace and Plo led an assault in, so that they could find Talzin and question her. On the other side of the battle, the 2 guards defending Yaddle ignited their pikes and marched down the ramp of their ship to fend off the incoming 20 or so zombies. Their weapons spun, lighting up the dark realm of Dathomir. Across the battlefield, Jedi heroes claimed victory over and again, yet their most dangerous opponents was all that had remained. Outside the cave, the few survivors were gathered up and forced to surrender, as the rest of the Jedi, still trying to incur as little damage as possible, protected these survivors from the still raging conflict. Windu and Plo burst through the wall of a cave within the Coven's cavern. The wall collapsed on Old Daka, killing her immediately, and Mother Talzin raged forward, igniting her own saber from Dathomir magic. The sword of Talzin slammed into Mace's blade, as Plo moved behind her, where she parried and struck aggressively at the Keldor. But the Jedi, they were organized. She whipped back and connected with Mace, who pulled her out of the cave and used the Force to shove the Great Mother into the ground. She rolled off of it, hissing at Mace Windu, before turning around and raising her hands and stealing the soul out of a dozen Jedi, who unluckily found themselves before her rage. Their knees buckled, and their screams slipped out of their bodies, as Talzin killed each of them in one swift usage of the Force. Mace and Plo moved forward, Windu swinging through Talzin's body as she screamed in agony, disappearing in nothingness and appearing to have been killed. The Jedi would gather the survivors and demand answers, and when they revealed that a Night Brother was taken in by a human Sith Lord, they were grateful but unsatisfied. They also learned that the name of the Sith was Sidious, but there was very little the Jedi could do with that. One of the sisters, fearful of the Jedi, created an orb that replayed Sidious's abduction of Maul, and handed it over to the Jedi as a peace treaty, wishing that they not hurt them anymore. Those who survived gaslit themselves into believing that their Great Mother had done this to them, because the Jedi had only come with 3 members before she attacked them. Talzin had betrayed their clan, and they would need to rebuild now. It had been a devastating day for all of them. The Jedi felt terrible because the answer they got wasn't really that great, and they promised to help the clan rebuild, because they truly didn't want it to come to this. but the Sith were still a true threat in the galaxy and they needed to go. However, despite their promises to help the Night Sisters rebuild, which they would, some Jedi would leave the Battle of Dathomir wondering if it were the Jedi who were the true threats to the galaxy instead of the Sith, for they had slaughtered innocents inside their own homes for not revealing secrets to them. Regardless though, the Jedi were one step closer to finding the Sith, because they had confirmed their existence. Whether there were 2 Sith or 3, they didn't know, but it was a clear answer of the reality that faced the galaxy. On Coruscant, Yoda spoke to Chancellor Kaj about the recent discovery regarding the Sith. She truly couldn't care less, but she did see value in this. If she could convince the public that there was a threat, one that she had extinguished, then perhaps re-election could be much easier, especially against the likes of the Coruscant Senator Finis Valorum, who was eyeing the seat of Chancellor. She told the Jedi Grandmaster that if he could propose an adequate budget for this, she'd be happy to oblige. If he wanted any hope of getting this through the Senate, the Jedi would need to educate the populace about the Sith, because she didn't even know who they were. What were the chances that anyone else would? Yoda hadn't realized this in the slightest. The population of the last 500 years or so had absolutely no connection to the Sith. They were a forgotten history, maybe a question on a huge test for students in secondary school. Hell, even history majors maybe only had to write one short answer question about why they were bad, but no one else knew or cared. Yoda would have to consult the Jedi archivist regarding this notion of informing the population. When Opa Rancisis returned to the High Council chambers, he brought with him a star chart of locations where these bursts happened at. This was of course ancient history, but there were themes. They typically happened at highly force-attuned planets, or where no one would expect them to happen. In the same fantasy story Jedi were all told as kids, they had to look where they least should expect. These stories enforced ideals that made sure the Jedi wouldn't overlook anyone or anything, because gifts could belong to those they thought lesser of. If you judge Yoda by his size, then you'd miss the gift of his heart. This could be said for thousands of Jedi across history, and that was the point. Opa believed that they should look across outlying systems. Most of the common planets had very little populations, so they could have scouts investigate these planets. Though the question became, what were they looking for? In a similar manner to expeditions to Brendok, the Jedi would go in pairs of 4 so they could cover the most ground possible. They were going to bring back samples of planets and attempt to find high concentrations of the Force. At this point, the Jedi had no reason to believe that the rise in the Force came from any singular individual. It hadn't been heard of before on this magnitude. Opo's and Vo's research told them that in the case that it was a person or individual, the concentration of such a burst would be lesser. And what the Jedi of the Council felt was in great magnitude. There did remain the mystery of why they were alerted to it, but they couldn't find the answer just yet. No one really understood why the Counselors felt the shift in the Force, but they continued anyways. As Yoda prepared a package for the Senate, he also instructed Master Sindralik to begin a new regiment of training for all Jedi. If the Sith had truly returned, then they needed to be ready for war. It didn't matter if there were 2 Sith or 500, they had to be prepared. And at the same time, the Jedi Council would be forced to move on from Pali Depeshan, as he wished to step down from his seat. Qui Gon would be offered the position, but it would instead go to the unorthodox Sifo Dyas. The next several months would see the Jedi Order becoming more and more panicked. Their actions, at least from the outside, looked fearful and rushed, not to the public, but to the Sith. And ironically, the Sith felt the same panic. It wasn't because they necessarily feared the Jedi, but because they caused a huge disruption in the status quo. Whatever had alerted them made them really paranoid, and the fact that the Night Sisters were almost driven into extinction was one great case and point of Jedi fear. But also, Senator Palpatine couldn't take advantage of the Senate, and he was forced to make a desperate choice. The Jedi package given to Chancellor Kaj let her release public broadcasts on both adult and children networks, informing everyone of the Sith. It was presented as a historical documentary. It had cool graphics, a great narrator, some awesome historical images, animation, the whole 9 yards. It was an expertly done documentary, meant to hold retention and ensure those who watched left with a genuine fear of the Sith. Following this release, Chancellor Kaj made several remarks about the potential of a returning Sith, and what she would do to ensure they never made a return. Hundreds of checkpoints would be established in governmental buildings, and inside of important Republic security buildings, as well as business structures, to detect the Sith. These were count readers, and it didn't do anything to anyone. It would simply alert authorities if an individual had a higher midichlorian count than the average person. This did not make them a threat, but it would be enough for the Jedi to question them if need be. See? Kinda like a police force. Chancellor Kaj ran on this fear-mongering message, and it helped her defeat Finis Valorum with relative ease. He was a career politician and he ran on his core support, so he was unprepared when Kaj pulled this whole Sith thing out of nothingness. But it helped her win office, and the Sith now needed to make a move. It would be awfully suspicious if two individuals, really high in status, stopped working with the Republic after she implemented these count readers, so they needed to be really good at lying. But there was a problem. The Jedi were hyper-aware now. They just massacred the Night Sisters, which was a huge deal, which was why the Sith were very concerned. However, while they made their own decision on how to address going forward, their young assassin disappeared in the middle of the night. Maul was taken into the Jedi Order after he ran to them for help, but this wasn't his choice. The young Sith assassin was son to Mother Talzin, and she hadn't died by Jedi hands. In an essence transfer of her own, she survived on the moon of Zardosa Styx, where she manipulated a group of cultists to help her use the power of a nearby sun to reconstruct her body. She was buying time because the sun wouldn't align for a long while. As a result, she mind-controlled her still-growing son and forced him away from the Sith lair on Coruscant. She had hate in her heart and revenge on her mind. The Jedi accepted Maul because he was scared, and also, Zabraks don't just get out to Coruscant for no reason. This alerted the Jedi Council to the Sith presence on the planet, and they took the boy in. Talzin would actively control her son for the time being. Thus, her boy would be trapped in his own body, watching himself make decisions that he had no control over. While the Great Mother and Sith were trying to counter Jedi movements and the Republic was implementing their count readers, the new counselor had a vision. Sifo Dyas was brought onto the council because he was unlike the rest of the members. He was also very gifted with Force visions, and one night he had a vision of slavery in the Outer Rim. Out across the dunes of an unknown planet, there was a Virgins. He would explain his vision to his peers and propose that their search didn't belong to a location or celestial body, rather to an individual. The Jedi were in great disbelief, but Sifo Dyas, adopting a more Qui Gon stance within their chambers, theorized that they had just been gifted the Chosen One. Where he or she was, he didn't know, but if they could find them, then perhaps they could shift the tide. Sifo further explained that if it were indeed the Chosen One, then it would explain why the Council was alerted, and it would explain how they learned of the Sith so rapidly after this individual's birth. It would directly prove that the Chosen One was helping them restore the balance. Sifo Dyas came off like a madman, but his points had truth to them, and even more than that, he identified the swift change that happened to the Republic. Within these chambers, they all preferred Kaj over Valorum, and she stayed in office. The stars were aligning, and they'd be remiss if they didn't seize the moment. The Jedi, so desperate to quell the rise of the Sith, decided to listen to Sifo Dyas. His point may have been unorthodox, but that was why they brought him into their ranks. He had just given them an answer, and they should take it. If they didn't, then they were spitting into the face of the Force. It gifted Sifo a vision. Now it was their duty to find this individual Chosen One. The Jedi Master would be tasked with 50 knights and ordered to go into the Outer Rim and search every single planet with a sand dune. They were all given M-count readers, similar technology used for the stations inside of official Republic buildings, and then sent off. The only difference with these readers is they didn't use pricks of blood. You could just do drive-by pings on somebody. It was awesome. It required a lot less work from the Jedi too, so they could save their time. In the following days, change would sweep the Order. In the middle of the night, young Maul, cloaked under Mother Talzin's protection, would sneak into the halls of the temple. Due to his small size, he would use vents to escape temple guards. After ducking past security and electrical, the young Zabrak would pop into the Councilor's corridor. Most of the members were dispatched around the city on different missions. The only ones present inside the temple were Tera Sinube, Jocasta Nu, and Yoda. Maul, under his mother's will, snuck into Yoda's room and gutted the unsuspecting Grand Master as he slept. Yoda, though, survived the initial blow, which caused him to awake in howling pain. This alerted other Jedi in the temple, and as Maul killed their leader, he was cornered upon his attempt to escape. But that wasn't the worst part. After Talzin killed her old foe, she would release her grip on Maul, who was stuck in a perpetual state of confusion and shock. Unluckily for Mother Talzin, she had spent so much of her time manipulating Maul that she would never find her path back to her own body. She'd get lost in the cosmos, eventually finding home on a dead world in the Vong galaxy. Maul, on the other hand, just a 15-year-old boy, pleaded with the temple guards. He was afraid. He didn't know what had happened to him, but he did know that while he was inside his own head, watching his life unfold in front of him, he preferred the Jedi kindness compared to the darkness of the Sith. Jedi instructors cared for him and treated him with love, and now he had just killed their Grand Master. The Dathomir magic radiated out of him, and he, with an ignited saber in his hand, defended strikes from the Battle Master, before eventually getting speared by the temple guard's pike. His death would be regrettable for the Jedi, but they never truly knew how much pain the poor boy had been through, especially due to his mother. Despite the Grand Master dying in the middle of the night, two developments were coming to light. Hago Damask was a Sith, and Senator Palpatine was too. They weren't informed of the implementation of Count Readers, and it blindsided them, because it happened much earlier than it was projected to happen. Sidious was caught first, because he was inside the senatorial district, where the Jedi had a temporary outpost established, one that no one else knew about. Plo Koon, Saesee Tiin, and Yarael Poof descended on him in his sleep. Palpatine, having not killed Plagueis, had no reason to train himself to stay awake all the time. It would be his downfall. He would never awake again, being placed in the carbon freezing. Plagueis, on the other hand, would be attacked by Windu, Rancesis, and Eeth Koth. This team acted quicker than the one that struck at Palpatine, but it wouldn't work for them. The Sith Lord would begin a chase that would take the Jedi generations to complete. Plagueis knew that the time for the Sith was not now, and in his failure to save his student, he disappeared to the shadows for decades. He continued to descend into madness, and he called an asteroid home for the time being. He would bring new students into his life, and he would kill them in frustration, for they could never be Palpatine. Darth Plagueis the Wise may have been the greatest alchemist in Sith history, but simple works of the Force would not resurrect their dying cause. The great shift that followed the death of Yoda, Talzin, and the carbon freezing of Palpatine made room for the Chosen One. As Sifo Dyas theorized, the boy he would find on Tatooine would be that Chosen One. Anakin would fill the role that was once held by the most powerful avatars of the Force. With each of them being removed, and the Republic saving itself from a more corrupt politician, there was room for change. But that wouldn't be seen, at least not in great amount until Anakin grew up. The young Chosen One would be protected and guided by the Council. They would dedicate their time and their lives to overseeing his growth as a Jedi, and in full belief of just a prophecy, the Jedi would watch Anakin grow into the Jedi that would change the future. His birth and creation were signs of the time to change, and the Jedi, as it turned out, were alerted by Master Kirik and Phila, who had felt the deep vibrations of the Force and decided to outwardly inform the counselors on Coruscant. As Mother Talzin became the last living being in the Vong galaxy, Anakin would become the hero of the future Republic. In the time that he grew up, the Jedi would accept more members than ever before, because of the midichlorian count technology developed under Chancellor Kaj. The final acts of Yoda would remain constant for years, because the Council could never find Plagueis and thus had to train their members for war. The Munsith kept the Jedi on their toes, even though he would never be the threat to force the galaxy into war. Plagueis never gave up, but his delusions of grandeur slipped away. He instead dedicated his life to immortality and preserving the Sith way, which he would for a long time too, but not longer than Anakin's life. See, Mother Talzin arriving in the Vong galaxy alerted them to the fact that there were other, more conquerable locations around the universe, and unbeknownst to them, they walked into an even more hostile galaxy. The Jedi Order had grown, but they had also suggested, lightly, that the Republic begin war with the Outer Rim. Similar to the rise of the Nile, there was a rise of syndicate powers, and they challenged the Republic, especially because the Trade Federation never had the gall to blockade Naboo in this timeline. Instead, what ironically happened was the Federation got military contracts with the Republic. So instead of sending citizens into war against the scum of the galaxy, they sent battle droids. And this elongated conflict of about 10 years would help shape this galaxy for war. The reason it took so long was battle droids were designed for large-scale conflict, not for raids per se. So a lot of failures on the part of the Republic came from the fault of the Federation, and especially the B-1 battle droid, both costing the Republic and Conglomerate billions of credits, but the payout would be worth the fight. When the war started in 18 BBY, Anakin Skywalker was already a Jedi Master. He was born and raised a Jedi, trained by the entire High Council. His skills were remarkable, his passion for the Force and love of those around him unlike any other. He was not quite a maverick like Qui Gon, but he was unique, partially because he was trained by Sith Dyas. Though Anakin's care for the outside of the galaxy would shape how the Jedi moved forward. He would follow in Mace's footsteps, becoming the youngest member to join the High Council and be the youngest master on it. The Jedi besieged the Outer Rim, saving millions of lives and helping reshape it. This brought even more young Jedi prospects into the Order, which too would change how the Jedi handle themselves. The intricacies of this war would be lost to time by the time the Vong attacked, because the Vong were the greatest threat to the galaxy. But this group of warlords from a dead galaxy entered a truly united one. The Republic encompassed the entire galactic map, and thus, once the Vong entered, they were countered effectively. Poor old Plagueis the Wise, after killing his third student, would accidentally get clobbered by a destroyed Federation warship. Didn't really help that he found home on an asteroid. But outside of that, it was a strenuous conflict. The 10 years of war with the Outer Rim shaped the Republic military into more elite and technologically superior battle droids and warships. The war with the Vong, that came in 0 BBY, would take 5 years. But when it was done, the Jedi would be heroes. They had been during the 10-year war, but they were seen more as political groupies. Now they were actual heroes, and Skywalker was leading the charge the entire way. This fight with the Vong would end off the Sith, end the cycle of growing syndicates in the Outer Rim, and save the Republic from corrupting itself and caving in. While Anakin's birth directly changed the outcome of the war between the Jedi and the Sith, his own life would be about directly changing the fate of the galaxy. The Jedi were growing, and now their cosmos was safe, something that would remain the mission statement of the expanding Jedi Order and its chosen one for centuries to come. And that, my friends, is our story, and special thanks to the patrons:
Manuel Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Smoobs, There Are Cars, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Blackie Chan, Django Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pyramark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewo 670, Annika Stink Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Nguyen, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Youngling Slayer 66, Man Meta Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Ford's Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Darkseid 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing.
First point on the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. Whoa, that's pretty cool. So, the Virgins, I wanted to do like this kind of mystery thing. There was something that came up to me when I was doing this, and I was like, what if the Jedi just like went to all-out war against the Night Sisters? Firstly, they'd absolutely demolish them. No doubt there. I think there'd be conflict, I think it'd be tense, but I think they'd win. And so, what I really wanted to kind of showcase was like the Jedi acting on fear, which is something that they're always like, fear, you're not supposed to do that, but what if I did? And that's basically this. They're acting on fear the entire story. And they're like panicking, and I kind of wanted this funny dynamic where the Sith are panicking because the Jedi are panicking. It's like a weird dynamic where it's like, stop doing that, you're doing it, I'm doing it, you're doing it, you know? So that whole panic thing was kind of fun to work with. And then just having Anakin be the anchor of the story without really being present in it until the end, where he gets to be, you know, this ultimate hero who defeats the Yuzang Vong in this big war. So I hope you all enjoyed the story. Love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.